Next, I'm going to talk a bit about solar car project management. I hinted at this at the beginning of the day, where in a project like this, you really need to have a plan for how to get all the things that you need to do done in your solar car. And so I'm going to walk you through a little bit of what I've learned um, just managing solar car projects and also managing projects in general. I come from this from a professional engineering perspective. I have served as a product team lead and a cost account manager for Raytheon. And in projects like ours that are 4 to 5 year long projects, it's important to make sure that we have an ability to plan out our project in specific tasks and use that as a way of tracking our progress and making sure that we are within the resources that we have. You heard a little bit about this in the presentation from the Keller Center for Advanced Learning team, and their captain talking about having Gantt charts for planning. This is basically that thing. So I always like to start out with some type of quote that triggers your thought on project management. And this one comes from Stephen Covey, and it is, all things are created twice, first mentally, then physically. The key to creativity is to begin with the end in mind, with a vision and a blueprint for the desired results. And that's really talking about the idea of you got to envision what you're going to come up with before you actually make that happen. But from a project management perspective, you really need to think through and plan, what is it that I'm going to be doing? How am I going to be accomplishing the goal of creating a solar car, and then putting that project plan in place, you can then implement it and create something that you can eventually raise. From a solar car perspective, we already know that our solar car projects are complex. You have lots of different teams, or you should have a lot of different teams working together. In our case, we had a mechanical team, an electrical team, a power team, and a business aspects team. Solar car projects take a long time. If you had a project that was, 2 to 3 weeks long, you probably don't need to do any project management. You'll probably take more time planning than you would implementing. But for a project like ours, a year-long project, it takes a long time, and you need to figure out how to break that apart. And then, a lot of times we go in to solar car projects and not everyone on the team knows how to do everything. And so you got to consider that. Well, okay, so if those are some of the parameters of a solar car project, how do we deal with that in project management? Well, if you have multidisciplinary teams, how do these teams work together? Are there certain dependencies? For example, could the electrical team go and put in wiring in the car before the chassis is made? Likely not. And so you have to think through the dependencies between teams to make sure that everyone gets to do the work that they plan to do at the time that they plan to do it. For projects like this that take a long time, how do you ensure that the project is done on time? How do you track that you are making good progress? You don't want to get to, May, June, July and realize, oh, I still have 3-4 months of work left. You want to be able to track up front and say, oh, I'm ahead of schedule or I'm behind schedule. And then for those that need new skills, how do you make sure that your teaching resources are appropriately allocated? So, there's going to be a lot of new skills that students will need to learn throughout the course of a solar car project. but you don't want to throw everything at them up front because you're not going to be able to practice those skills you learn until it's time to fabricate those components. But you also don't want to be waiting and saying, oh, I could have been fabricating the frame by welding, but I've got no welders, so I've got to then train welders in advance. So part of the project management is to say, these are the tasks that need to be done. And then what are my resources? Who's going to be working on it? And are they equipped to help work on those tasks? So when we look at project management, we're looking at how do you break up the bigger thing, I've got to build a solar car up into smaller pieces that we can then track and make sure that everything is going okay. Then develop the roadmap. Once you've broken them down into major pieces, how do we get each of those pieces done? Figure out the dependencies between those teams. As we were talking about, you got to have a chassis before you go and put the wiring in. You got to be able to have all your major electrical components installed before that happens. Or, you got to be able to have your wheels on a spindle before you can start figuring out where to hang your brakes, how to connect the steering, and so on. So you need to figure out those type of dependencies. Then the next thing is set trip points for evaluation. So one of the things I've been focusing on is, how do you know that you're on track? How do you know that things are progressing and you're not falling behind schedule? Or maybe even you're ahead of schedule, and that's great. And so how do you track that everything is going to plan, and that I don't need to apply additional resources, right? The part of project management is, I'm slipping behind on the mechanical team, for example. Well, maybe I can go and find more team members who can help fabricate some of the mechanical components, or I can maybe get someone in a community to come and help out and help advise on how to do things faster. You want to be able to have some way of tracking your progress such that these trip points can get you to think about, how do I apply more resources to it? And then a project management plan will then let you prioritize work on a week-by-week basis. And we have this concept in project management called the critical path. There may be a lot of different tasks on your schedule that you do in parallel, but there's this one set of tasks that if that particular task slips, then everything else slips. And so you want to focus on those tasks that are on the critical path that says, if I slip these things, it will slip everything else down the chain. And so a project management plan will help you with that. So how do I manage a project I've never done before, right? So, when you think about especially newer teams coming into this, you go, well, I've not done this before. How do I possibly, plan all these things out? Well, we've provided a resource for you. We have this at least high-level project planning calendar that gives you an idea of what you should be doing at any particular time. So in our calendar, we have you forming the team and doing fundraising and purchasing parts. And then at this time frame, in the December to March time frame, you are prototyping and building your car. And that's why we had the specialty workshop here in January, is because we're providing you additional details on how you actually might build a car, and you might have questions on that as you go along. And we're hoping that, by the time you get to April and to May and June, that you'd be testing and re-engineering, and then you can arrive in July with a tested car that has been tested for, 500 miles. That's the desire. And so, that gives you a high level idea of what it takes to create a solar car. But, the key questions you have probably are, how do I get a construction timeline? How do I fabricate a solar car in time? So one of the ways that you might do that is to break up your project into your major systems, right? Project management is easier to do as you start breaking things down into smaller pieces. You have your mechanical system, your electrical system, your power system, and then your business and sponsorship type of stuff. And then you break those down into subsystems, right? And mechanical system, you might have your frame, your suspension, your steering, and so on and so on. And so you start breaking that down to smaller pieces. And when you start thinking about those subsystems, there are natural dependencies, right? As I shared, you have to have your suspension in place before you start figuring out how to do the steering. You must have your batteries in place before you power your motor and controller, right? You can install the motor and controller, but you won't be able to power without your batteries in place. And so if you take those components and you start breaking them down into smaller tasks, then you can start creating a project plan that you can track to. As we recommend, we want you to be done with construction of your car on or around the March timeframe so that you have opportunities to re-engineer and test. We understand that new teams probably don't have the benefit of doing that, but you certainly want to be aggressive in your schedule and finish early. So, for example, one of the ways to motivate our team was to challenge folks to go and get things done faster than we had planned. We call that a 50-50 schedule, that we have a 50% chance of making it and a 50% chance of failing. But if we plan for that, then we're going to strive to meet that goal and you can stay on track. And you leave a bit of time at the end that can sort of eat back or provide you back some time to completion. So that's sort of the slack time that's there. You definitely don't want to be planning things out such that you finish in June or July and eat into your re-engineering and test time. You want to create a project plan that finishes on or about April. So here's an example of a schedule that you might use at a high level, right? So you can start by looking at creating the frame, the roll bar and roll cage, and then looking at the front axle and seats. So some of those things up front in your fabrication. In parallel to that, of course, you can be working on your electrical design because that's not dependent on having a frame fabricated. You may need to have at least the frame designed so that you know where things get laid out, but you can at least start the design of that up front. But you'll also see in here that I provided some dependencies, right? You can't finalize your suspension mounts without your front and rear axles all taken care of. You can't figure out your steering without those suspension installed because you're going to have some tie rods that are part of the suspension. You won't be able to figure out your final steering rod and your steering wheel until you've installed your seats. And so you sort of think through the design and think about what needs to come before something else. And this particular presentation will be on the website. It already is on our workshop webpage. So you can use this as a starting point to prepare your plan. From there, once you sort of laid out your subcomponents, then you want to break things down into smaller pieces. For example, if you are trying to do all the steering stuff, well, you're going to have to, in your design, figure out where you're going to have your steering wheel and your column, where you're going to put your rack and pinion if that's your steering device of choice. And then you have to install the wheels, install your rack and pinion, fabricate your steering rods, and then fabricate your mounts for your steering column and wheel. So you can sort of break those down, and you want to keep breaking down your task into something that you can achieve on a given workday. Because if you're able to create a list of things you're going to work on a particular day, everyone knows how to stay on track. And when you're done, you can check it off and say, I'm done with that. We always get a sense of accomplishment to either, cross off the line or erase something. So by the end of the day, we have a pretty clear whiteboard. We use the write each of the tasks on a whiteboard, and we're able to then get that sense of accomplishment that, yeah, we accomplished a lot today. And then you can also use that as a way of providing a sense of responsibility to your team members. You can actually give each individual task to your team members and say, hey, you're responsible for this thing, or you're responsible for that thing. Certainly, there are tasks that might need multiple people to work on, or you might need some help here and there, but you have a certain person on your team who is assigned to that task and is responsible for the task, and then they can run it to ground. They can always ask other team members for help, but at least they're responsible for it, and then they get a sense of, hey, I did this and I did that. So that's sort of how you break down to smaller pieces along the way. As I shared in the beginning of the day, I did advise the Walnut High School Solar Car team, and we had built 2 different vehicles, an electric solar powered vehicle, and then we had an advanced division vehicle. And so what we would do during the week, we met on weekends, but during the week, we would meet and we would actually come up with the set of tasks that we would perform on that week. And so the captains and the team leads would get together and with the advisors and come up with a list, and they would actually write it out on a whiteboard. And so when they got into the shop, they had a list of things to do. And so in a particular day, we had a example workday like this, fabricating steering rods, fixing the rear suspension, installing chain. So it was sort of a little all over the place in the sense of we had a lot of different subsystems that were working at the same time. But we sort of knew that we needed to get certain things done so that other things can get done. Or we knew that we had some resources that, we had some team members who were idle and we can assign them to a particular task. And so this is a particular example of a workday that we have. In an ideal world, of course, we identify all the tasks and then we finish them on time, right? Of course, that never happens in the plan. As you build a solar car, you will know that, hey, I planned for this, but well, I forgot about that. So for example, you might be in your car and you go and say, well, I planned out this instrument panel out and everything's all squared away. It's go make your instrument panel. Well, you might have forgotten to have a mount for that instrument panel already fabricated before you worked on that panel. And so you'll go, oh, wait, I finished the panel. Now what? Where do I put this? And then you would actually have to add the task that says, go and install the mount for that. And so every week, especially when we get into the smaller tasks that you can accomplish in any particular day, you'll be adding to it and there'll be a living schedule. Likewise, we always shoot for things to be done on time, but sometimes we run into complications and certain tasks don't get done in a particular time. And so you want to plan for some type of spillage into future weeks. And so this is why you build into your calendar some amount of contingency that says, hey, if I slip, you are able to essentially accommodate for that and not eat into the testing and re-engineering schedule. So the other thing is, as we talked about, be aggressive in planning. If you give someone a week to work on a particular task, they will probably take a week to work on that task. It's natural. It's, we tend to do that. And so you want to try to challenge team members, say, hey, can you finish that early? Can you get this done, within 3 days instead of a week? And so a lot of team members rise to that challenge and say, yes, I can get that done. And it almost becomes a game that there's a challenge like, I bet you can't finish that within an hour. And then they go and try to finish that. And it sort of makes things fun. So in summary, I think project management, especially in a solar car context, allows you the ability to break your project down into smaller tasks that you can go and give different team members, and then you can track progress, that you can know that if you are behind schedule or ahead of schedule, or looking at prepping the resources that you have to keep your project on schedule. For example, if you know that you'll be fabricating your frame a particular week, you'll want to make sure that you have all the metal that you need to fabricate that frame. You got to make sure that you have the appropriate people who can put that together. And so project management allows you to do that. And if you do it right, you're able to identify all the dependencies between the different teams and the different tasks to make sure that you have what you need when you need it. And even though you have a plan, don't be afraid to go and update that plan on a weekly basis to make sure that you account for things that you have missed, and then make sure that you budget some schedule time for these type of contingencies, these unexpected or unfinished tasks. So I hope that was useful in giving you a sense of how we use project management in solar car project. And I hope that you can use those skills not only to make sure that you can get your solar car built on time, but in future projects as well.